Generally speaking, when a game franchise expands beyond one or more games, it typically moves the source material forward in some way. Now, there are a lot of different ways this can be accomplished. It can be new gameplay mechanics, advances in graphical fidelity, improvements in narrative, or just about anything else in between. The point is, things often move forward or at least stay the same. It's fairly unusual for things to go backwards. In the case of Starfleet Command 3, while it moves some things forward, it arguably moves an equal, if not more, amount of things backwards. Welcome, my name's Azadash, and welcome to another PC game retrospective video. Now, one universal truth is that for as long as video games have been around, the ability to release one alongside a movie as a tie-in has been possible. And it makes sense. When people are excited about a movie, it's a great opportunity to offer them the ability to play a game. Historically with games, this has translated to mixed results, and if we limit those to games just focusing on the Star Trek Next Generation crew, it becomes even more questionable. First, there was Star Trek Generations, which itself was a few generations behind current gaming technology. And then there was Hidden Evil, which some argue was evil and should have remained hidden. Now, with the final Next Generation crew movie, Nemesis, we didn't really get an official tie-in game as such, but rather a game that was heavily marketed alongside the movie's release. Starfleet Command 3 released just 1 month prior to the movie's release, and while it did feature the same setting, it had quite limited content from the actual movie. In fact, players at the time actually had to wait a full month after its release date before they could download the Nemesis content, presumably to avoid spoiling the reveal of the antagonist's ship, the Scimitar. Whatever your thoughts are about the movie, there is no doubt that the Scimitar is a cool ship, and when I first heard about this, I thought, great, I bet it's going to recreate the iconic battle against the Enterprise from the movie, or maybe it's going to see you take on some covert mission that takes place before the movie. Well, I was right, it does take place before the movie, but it's not against the Enterprise and it's not a covert mission. It's a training mission, which sees you test out features of the ship, such as engines and tractor beams. Now, to be fair, you do get to use the weapons in a random pirate encounter while completing these tests, and the Scimitar absolutely wipes the floor, but according to my footage, this entire mission from start to finish lasts under 9 minutes. So while it was marketed alongside the movie, there's very little movie tie-in here. Now, this fact doesn't inherently make it any less of a game. It's fine to promote something alongside other media while only being loosely related. However, regardless of it being connected to another story or not, it still needs to be a good game for people to enjoy it. Before we can determine that, I need to detail exactly what we are looking at here, because while we are playing the current GOG release of Starfleet Command 3, which includes the latest patch and additional Nemesis content, I am using an unofficial mod called the SFC Upgrade Mod version 3.3. Originally, I came about this mod while searching for a way to play the game in a modern widescreen resolution, which from what I can tell is the only way to play this game in widescreen. However, there is so much more here. Firstly, virtually all graphics are uplifted to a much higher resolution or model, giving the game a much more modern feel than a game released in 2002. Then there's a variety of gameplay changes, and I'll be the first to admit I tend to enjoy the vanilla experience when playing older games. However, the more I read through the mod's changes, the more I like the sound of them, and with no way to play in widescreen without this mod, I decided to push forward with it. Essentially, while the core gameplay systems and mechanics all remain, the overall pace of the game is dramatically improved. Weapons do more damage, shields recharge faster, and the base speed level is increased. These are all positive things, and I'll drop a link to the mod in the video description. In terms of critical reception, while it holds an aggregated score in the high 90s, there's a really vast interpretation of the game. In fact, it's probably one of the largest deltas in a score for a licensed game I've ever seen, certainly for this time period. On the positive sides, you have Game Informer and IGN, who gave it 93 and 82 respectively, praising the writing implementation and overall experience. Where on the less than positive sides, you had PC Game World and Computer Gaming World with 68 and 60 respectively, highlighting a lifeless campaign, technical problems, and a feeling that something had been lost from the game's interplay roots. Of course, while there are a few different ways to play the game, including a multiplayer and conquest mode, arguably the main event is the campaign. Now, there is good and bad here. Firstly, the good. The main campaign, excluding the Borg, more on this later, tells a single narrative as opposed to the original's many. This allows for much greater player investment in the story. It's also presented in a way which allows you to play it from 3 different perspectives. While you can technically play these in any order, the narrative is designed to be played in the order of Klingons, Romulans, and lastly the Federation. As far as the actual story goes, it revolves around the creation of a new Federation and Klingon joint starbase called Unity 1, and the subsequent investigation into an unprovoked attack on it from a new enemy. Look, it's not the worst story that's been told in the Trek universe, but it's certainly not the best. Part of the reason that the story suffers is that the storytelling mechanics are vast and varied. You have exposition delivered via full-motion video, via mission briefing and objective text, and via in-game audio. This would be fine if all 3 connected together. Unfortunately, it feels like all 3 narrative engines were created by 3 different people who didn't communicate with each other that well. As I said, it's serviceable, but not a standout when compared to other Trek stories that have been told. Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's scan some outposts, go to Red Alert, and head back to 2002 to remember Starfleet Command 3. Gameplay is familiar to anyone with even a pedestrian knowledge of the past games. Each campaign sees the player navigate a galaxy map while encountering both main story and what I guess could be called side quests, which are effectively just skirmishes, all while earning the game's currency of prestige to enable you to upgrade your ship. In terms of the management side of things, that is, the galaxy map display and everything non-combat related, there's parts I like and parts that I feel are simply unfinished. In the Conquest mode, which basically sees you travel to different sectors and engage in various skirmishes, the map works fine. However, in the Campaign mode, the map will often tell you that you need to report to a particular sector and allow you some time to get there before automatically transporting you there. Unfortunately, there's 2 issues here. If you save your game, which you have to at the menu as it's not possible to save during combat, upon resuming your save, there's no way to tell where you are meant to go, meaning you need to click around until you are auto-transported somewhere. The other problem is the game says that it'll auto-transport you to where you are required, only it doesn't. It manually moves you and still allows you to interact with the mission's menu, which resulted in me almost entering a non-main story mission despite me thinking that I was entering the actual story mission. Now, once you know about both of these things, you can do things to mitigate them. For example, I started naming my save files with the location required to progress the story and allowed more time to move to the required sector. But both of these things seem like issues that shouldn't exist in a mainstream licensed game. Other areas of the galaxy map, such as the shipyard and supply dock, are straightforward enough. However, they largely use the exact same interface as the original game, and that's okay, but that system was fairly bare bones in that original game, and objectively, it hasn't aged well here. The bright spot in the galaxy map is the refit system, which effectively refers to the game's upgrade system for your ship. Now, I say ship because unlike the original, you can only command 1 ship at a time. And honestly, I think this is a missed opportunity. One of the more enjoyable parts of the first game for me was management of a variety of ships during combat encounters. It wasn't perfect, but it did lend itself more to the namesake of Starfleet Command. However, what's here in the refit system is very good and addresses one of my biggest complaints about the first game, which was that you never really got to feel powerful as the AI scaled with your ship. While there is of course some scaling still here, the refit system rewards mission completion, especially with bonus actions such as capturing instead of destroying enemy ships, and allows you to upgrade all of the major components within your ship. You want to be able to outrun everyone? No problem, install an impulse engine upgrade. You want to be able to sustain a beating? Fine, upgrade your shields. You want to be the one giving the beating? Fine, upgrade your weapons. You do need to keep within a certain power profile, and this is done for balancing, which is fine, but otherwise you have the choice to personalize your ship to suit your playstyle. There is also an officers system, which allows you to train and recruit more experienced officers, and I have to be honest here, I never actually worked out how this works. No matter what changes I made, I never really noticed any change. Whether or not that's just my experience or by design is up for interpretation. Of course, the galaxy map is only a small part of the overall game experience, with the main event undoubtedly being the space combat. Like with the game's other systems, there are steps forward from past titles, but equally steps backwards. The most apparent change from the past is the interface, which has been dramatically simplified to allow the player to focus on the information that is the most valuable during the combat experience. But this simplification doesn't just stop at the interface, with a variety of game mechanics such as weapons and shields seeing simplification also. For example, there's no longer any missiles in the game, and the shield grid is now made up of just 4 axes as opposed to 6. For the most part, I like these simplifications, and I think it improves the overall flow and pace of the game. The actual ship-to-ship combat is pretty good, with a good mix of enemy types, and each race requiring subtly different strategies to be successful, all backed by a pretty good camera system with several options to give the player the best vantage point of the action. Enemy AI is also majorly improved, with the game providing a challenge at times, even on the medium difficulty. However, where Starfleet Command 3's space combat starts to come undone is where it goes in the opposite direction of simplification in trying to add depth to the experience. For example, the missions in this entry are far more complex and often require far more actions to complete. Generally, I would praise this type of depth, but the issue here is that it tries to layer this complexity and depth onto a game engine which was just not designed to support it. Also, with more objectives comes more communication, and this appears in the top left corner, with the player often able to choose from several replies. Discounting the fact that your choice in reply means absolutely nothing gameplay or narrative-wise, this type of communication interface was bare bones in the original title, which was fine because there wasn't much of it. However, in Starfleet Command 3, you'll sometimes get minutes of these text dumps which require clicking through, often taking your attention away from the more pressing matters of combat and control. Another example is that there are often a lot more ships involved in combat, which is generally a good thing. However, sometimes ships will try and retreat to the edge of the map, and if you are unlucky enough to get too close to the invisible border on the map, the game will end the current mission regardless of status, often resulting in a failed mission. Then there are the bugs, and honestly I don't have an explanation for these. In one situation, I had an objective to beam some crew over to a station and await further instructions. I beamed the crew over and then waited. And waited. And waited. And after trying everything possible, I concluded that the game had soft-locked itself and I had to exit and restart the mission from scratch. On the second attempt, as soon as I transported the crew over, I received a communication back and was able to proceed with the rest of the mission. Another situation saw me randomly start to take heavy damage while heading to a mission's exit area. I was able to finish the mission successfully, but this was unusual to say the least. Oh, and on exiting missions, I can't believe this is still a thing, but at complete random, sometimes completing an objective will result in a successful mission completion screen, whereas other times you need to pilot your ship to the edge of the map for the completion screen. I mean, I don't think this qualifies as a bug, but it does qualify as frustrating. Now, I will say there is one exception to the challenges with depth, and that's the introduction of the Borg. They have a small separate campaign which almost plays like a DLC of some description, with quite a few changes to combat, such as no shields but a constantly regenerating hull, as well as a few other improvements to provide balance. It's a small component of the overall game, but it is memorable and uplifts the overall gameplay experience. The game's presentation is an interesting case. Now, even without the mod which I mentioned earlier, graphical fidelity and general performance are improved. However, a lot of the interface and menus are almost carbon copies of the original game. There are times when this doesn't impact the game in any way, and there are other times when it does. The save system in particular is a great example, and look, I'm not going to nitpick grammar here, but the actual menu and how the save and load data is represented is just overly complex and not intuitive in any real way. There's also an external app to set things like resolution, and really for 2002, this should have been integrated into the main game. There's nothing inherently broken about the presentation, but you won't be walking away from this experience with high praise for it either. Sound design takes a few leaps forward thanks to the introduction of voice acting for a good chunk of the campaign, and it's pretty convincing too, with Patrick Stewart starring as always and delivering a very convincing Captain Picard.
Yes, this is troubling news. The Rakeli are a little-known race that has recently been expanding its influence in the former Organian Treaty Zone.
Music and effects are also quite good, validating my belief that even the most questionable Star Trek games still have very serviceable sound design.
We'll try. Good to have you here.
Now, when Starfleet Command 3 first released, I purchased it and played an awful lot of it. I still have very fond memories of spending time playing it. It was fun back in 2002, and even today, despite all of the challenges that I see in reflection, I still did have fun playing through it. Now, I would be lying that if I said some of the soft locks didn't impact the fun factor, but for the majority of the time I spent with it, I still did have fun. I think part of this is because I enjoy the source material, but another part is that despite its issues, it still delivers an entertaining gameplay loop that hasn't really been re-explored since its release. I can't stress enough that I think the 3.3 upgrade mod improves a lot of things in the game. However, if you do want to experience the original, it's still fine. It's just a bit of a slower game, which doesn't benefit from the increase in fidelity. Of course, after the fact, we now know that Star Trek Nemesis was largely a theatrical disaster, and as a result, severely impacted the overall franchise. In the 10 years prior to Nemesis's release, we got more than 25 Star Trek PC games. In the 10 years after Nemesis' release, we got 4. I often wonder if things were different with the movie's release, if these numbers would have looked different. However, I am thankful that we do have a pretty solid library of past entries to enjoy, and I can only hope that with the success of Strange New Worlds, that we might get even more Star Trek games in the future. When exactly that might be, and which developer might want to take that risk first, is something that I don't know. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.